In the first half of the NHL season, the Anaheim Ducks were one of the league's biggest surprises. Since the turn of the new year, however, they have not been able to keep up that same pace. Anaheim now finds themselves outside of a playoff spot and fighting for their lives to stay in contention in the Western Conference. We're going to take a look at Anaheim fading down the stretch, coming right up. Hey everybody, so today we're going to be talking about the Anaheim Ducks, who are unfortunately fading down the stretch as this NHL season goes along. They were one of the league's biggest surprises in the first half of the year, had a great start to the season, but have not been able to keep that up over the last 8 to 10 weeks or so, and now have put themselves in a position where they are fighting just to stay in contention for a playoff spot in the Western Conference. Now, before we get into it here, I do want to say, before people get mad, that Anaheim has massively overachieved from what their initial expectations were this season. Even if they don't make the playoffs, this has been a much better year for the Ducks than most people thought it was going to be. Myself included. I predicted them to be the last place team this year in the Pacific Division, and that is obviously not the case. And the fact that they're even competing for a playoff spot shows that the Ducks have been a lot better this year than they were initially expected to be. However, it's really been a tale of two seasons for the Anaheim Ducks. And if we look at what they were able to do starting at the beginning of the year in October through December, it was very, very good. And unfortunately, what's happened from January through now has not been as good. And we're going to take a look at kind of the two separate parts of the year that Anaheim has seen. But overall, they've still been a lot better than most people expected. However, it's looking less and less likely that they're going to make the playoffs. And we're going to take a look at that right now. So here's what I mean by kind of a tale of two seasons for the Anaheim Ducks. First, we have October through December, the first 2.5 to 3 months of the season here. Anaheim went 17-10-7. They had 41 points on the year. They were in a top 3 playoff spot in the Pacific Division. And really, at that point, it looked like Anaheim was going to be a playoff team this year. And a lot of people were like, whoa, like, where did this come from? They were not expecting Anaheim to be a playoff team, and they looked like they were going to be. Things were going really well for the Ducks. And they were, again, like I said, one of the most pleasant surprises in the NHL. They were scoring over 3 goals a game at 3.03 goals for per game. And they really were playing well defensively and giving up just 2.68 goals against per game for those first few months. Their special teams were absolutely outstanding. They were operating at 26.4% on the power play and 86.8% on the penalty kill. Really good all-around special teams from the Ducks. And that played a big role in a lot of their success as well. Unfortunately, since the turn of the new year, things have really gone the other way for Anaheim, and they've really started to struggle. And if we look at January through now, almost 10 days into the month of March, Anaheim is just 10-13-2 since the turn to 2022. Just 22 points gained in the standings. And obviously below 500. Their goal scoring has dropped off significantly. They've gone from scoring over 3 goals a game down to 2.72 goals for per game during the January through now stretch. And probably the number one thing that has cost the Anaheim Ducks is this number right here, their goals against per game. Literally giving up a full goal against per game more January through now than they did in the first few months of the season from October through December. 3.68 goals against per game since January 1st for the Anaheim Ducks. And that right there, I think, is the number one thing that has cost Anaheim. They went from giving up a very, very good number of goals at just 2.68 against per game to now giving up almost 4 goals a game at 3.68. And that has just been way too much to overcome for the Ducks, and they've started to lose a lot more games because of it. Their power play is still actually been pretty good, although it has dropped off a little bit, 23.4% on the power play in the last, 8 to 10 weeks as opposed to 26.4 early in the season. But again, power play's still been decent. The penalty kill has dropped off a ton, and that goes along with them just giving up a lot more goals in general. But their penalty kill, which was operating at 86.8% from October through December, now January through now, is just 79% on the PK. And again, that goes along with them giving up more goals overall in total. And I think that's really been the number one thing for the Ducks that has really hurt this team since the change of the new year, is that they are just giving up way too many goals against. Their defense, their goaltending has not held up. They're not getting the level of play that they were earlier in the season, and it's resulted in a lot less wins, and now they've been passed in the standings by a few different teams in the Pacific Division and are now really fighting for their lives in the Western Conference playoff race. So now, everybody, I'd like to take a look at the Western Conference standings, the wild card race, and just see how much this recent drop-off in play from Anaheim has hurt their playoff chances, where they stand now, and really we're at the point where they are fighting for every single point that they can get just to remain in contention. So let's take a look here. Western Conference standings in the wild card. Obviously, Anaheim, who was in a top 3 spot in the Pacific, is no longer there. Calgary has taken over the division lead with 75 points. LA is firmly in second place, right behind them with 71. And then Vegas is trailing a little bit behind LA with 68. Then you look at the wild card spots. Nashville and Dallas currently hold the wild card spots with 68 and 67 points apiece. And then Edmonton is the first team out of a playoff spot in the West with 64 points through 57 games. Next, after Edmonton, comes our friends, the Anaheim Ducks, who are now 27, 23, and 9 on the year with 63 points. However, one thing that is really worth noting here is this number right here, the games played. And this, I think, is going to end up being the thing that really hurts Anaheim in their chances of making the playoffs this year. The Ducks have already played 59 games this season, which is the most of any team around them. So if you look at all these other teams that they're fighting for positioning with, Calgary's only played 56, LA's played 58, Vegas has played 58, Nashville and Dallas have only played 56, Edmonton's played 57, Vancouver's played 57, Winnipeg's played 57, Anaheim has already played 59. Every team around them has games in hand on the Anaheim Ducks right now. So that's going to make the road even tougher, because all of these other teams have a chance to make up points with using those games in hand if they can win them. Anaheim's gotten themselves in a tough spot now. The last wild card spot is at 67 points. Anaheim is 4 points back of that. Unfortunately, though, Edmonton has 2 games in hand. Dallas and Nashville have 3 games in hand. Vancouver has 2 games in hand. Vegas has a game in hand. It is going to be tough for Anaheim to get back into one of those playoff spots unless they really go on a run here at some point over the next few weeks. They really need to go on some sort of big run where maybe they win 5 or 6 in a row, and then maybe they could make up those 4 or 5 points and try and get themselves back into a wild card spot. But it's going to take a major push from the Anaheim Ducks to make the playoffs at this point. And this recent stretch that they've had where, they haven't been playing that well since the turn of the new year, I think is ultimately going to end up costing the Ducks a playoff spot this season. So, all in all, it's really kind of been a tale of 2 years for Anaheim within this one NHL season. You have the 2021 part of this year where they were, 17, 10, and 7 in a playoff spot, looking like a playoff team, playing really well. And then you have the 2022 half of this year where they've kind of faded. They're fading right now. They just took a really bad loss where they got blown out by Chicago, who's a non-playoff team this year. and just haven't been able to keep pace with teams like LA and Vegas and even Edmonton, who's gotten a little bit ahead of them in the standings now. So, man, it's just, again, they've overachieved from what the expectations were. So it's not like Anaheim has had a bad year. This was a team that a lot of us thought was going to be a last place team, and that's obviously not the case. But at the same time, back in December, a lot of us were kind of expecting this team to make the playoffs with the way that they had been playing, and they haven't been able to keep that pace up. So they have faded here in the second part of the season. And again, they're a young team. They really weren't supposed to even be in playoff contention to begin with. So it's not like, it's a big bad thing that's happened here with them. But all in all, it's just interesting to point out the stark difference between the first half of the season and the second half of the season for Anaheim. And it's really been like two totally different years within the same NHL season for them. And ultimately, I do think it's going to end up costing this team a playoff spot, and they're probably just not quite there yet. Still really, really like the future in Anaheim. They've got a lot of great young players, a lot of great young talent, but it's probably not going to be this year that they get back into the playoffs. And the biggest overall thing is that goals against number that we saw earlier. I mean, when you go from giving up 2.68 goals against per game, which is very respectable, very solid, to giving up 3.68 goals against per game, which is really, really bad. Your offense probably isn't going to be able to keep up with that, and Anaheim's obviously hasn't. And I think that's overall been the biggest difference between that 2021 half of the year Ducks and this 2022 half of the year Ducks, is that goals against number is just so vastly different here in the second half of the season. So that's what I got on the Anaheim Ducks, everybody. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. And before you go, please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, links to our merchandise store, membership, and donations are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys soon.